The dead star had no name. It sat at the edge of the Orion spur like a forgotten tooth, cold and lightless for 6 million years. Nobody mapped it. Nobody visited. So when the space around it began to fold, not break, not tear, but fold, the way cloth folds when a hand pushes through from the other side, there was no one close enough to see it happen. The first to notice was not a soldier or a scientist. It was a cargo hauler named PETA, running a routine ice delivery between two outer belt stations. His ship's proximity sensor gave a single beep, then went completely silent. Not offline. Silent. As if whatever had just appeared in front of him was so large that the sensor had simply run out of numbers. He sat in his pilot's seat for a long moment, staring out the viewport at something his brain refused to organize into a shape. It was dark, but not the darkness of space. Space was empty dark. This was dense dark, structural dark, like looking at a mountain made of something that ate light and gave nothing back. It moved slowly, with the quiet certainty of a thing that has never been stopped by anything and does not expect to start now. PETA sent one transmission before his comms cut out. He said, "It is very, very big." That transmission, 14 words total including his ID header, reached the nearest relay station in 4 minutes. From there it was flagged, forwarded, bounced across 3 Concordat communication nodes, and landed on the desk of Admiral Rui Carvalho on Earth in just under 9 hours. By that time, PETA's single sighting had become 1,342 separate sightings. Every corner of the known galaxy, every inhabited sector, every major trade route, colony cluster, and deep space installation. The ships were everywhere. No warning, no approach path anyone could track. They had not traveled to these locations. They had simply arrived in them as if travel was a concept beneath their interest. The Galactic Concordat Emergency Channel opened at 300 Earth Standard Time and did not close for 11 days. 39 species speaking at once. 11 different translation systems competing to keep up. What came through was not strategy or coordination. What came through was fear, in 39 different voices, shaped by 39 different evolutionary histories, all saying more or less the same thing. We do not know what this is. The Draukin were the first to act with anything resembling a plan. Warlord Grevak, whose species had been the dominant military force in the galaxy for 4,000 years, assembled a battle group of 2,000 warships and moved on the nearest dark matter vessel within 6 hours of first contact. It was the largest single military deployment in recorded Concordat history. His fleet hit the ship with every weapon in their arsenal: pulse cannons, gravity shears, mass accelerators, quantum disruption torpedoes that could crack a moon in half. Every weapon passed through the hull like a stone through fog. The dark matter ship did not fire back. It did not move aggressively. It simply drifted, and when 3 Draukin vessels got too close to its displacement field, those ships compressed to the size of a fist in under a second. No explosion, no wreckage, just gone, folded into a smaller version of themselves by forces that had no name yet in any Concordat scientific language. Grevak ordered a full retreat. That had never happened before. Not once in 4,000 years of Draukin military history. The news of it spread across the Concordat faster than any official bulletin. If the Draukin were retreating, the logic went, then everyone should be running. And they did. Species after species pulled back their vessels, recalled their outposts, locked down their home systems. High Arbiter Thesson of the Concordat Central Council issued a galaxy-wide stand-down order and called for total observation silence. Do not provoke. Do not approach. Do not attempt contact. On Earth, Admiral Carvalho read the stand-down order. He set it aside. Then he pulled up the transmission from Dr. Arvid Strand, a physicist nobody senior had bothered to read, which had been sitting in the low-priority queue for 9 hours. Strand had sent his message before the ships appeared. He had been running a dark matter density survey from a small orbital platform above Titan when his instruments picked up geometric mass patterns forming across 6 galactic sectors simultaneously. Not random clustering. Geometry. Precise, repeating, intentional geometry. He had filed it as a probable instrument error, then filed it again as a possible anomaly, then finally sent it directly to Earth Fleet Command with a subject line that read, "Something is arranging itself. I don't know what. Someone should probably look at this." Carvalho read it twice. Then he opened a channel to Commander Dara Osai, who was 3 days out from the nearest dark matter ship with her vessel, the INS Defiance, on patrol in the outer corridor. He did not order her to engage. He did not order her to retreat. He sent her Strand's data and said 4 words. "Get closer, watch carefully." Dara read the transmission. She looked at the data. She looked out at the dark shape hanging in space 40,000 kilometers off her port side, so large it had its own local gravity shadow. Then she told her crew to strap in, cut their active emissions to near zero, and began moving toward it. The rest of the galaxy was running away. Humanity was taking notes. There is a particular kind of quiet that happens when something enormous is very close and completely still. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the body pay attention without being told to. The crew of the INS Defiance had been sitting inside that quiet for 6 hours. Nobody had raised their voice. Nobody had needed to. The dark matter warship filled roughly 40% of every external viewport, and it had not moved so much as a meter since Dara brought the ship to a halt at 32,000 kilometers. At this distance, the vessel's gravity shadow was measurable, subtle but there, like standing near a wall that breathes. Lieutenant Nadia Wolf was running passive sensor sweeps every 8 minutes and logging the results in silence. What she kept writing in her log in slightly different words each time was a version of the same note. Sensors return data. Data does not make sense. Rechecking calibration. The ship did not reflect light. It did not emit heat in any spectrum she had instruments for. It had mass, undeniably, because the Defiance's navigation system kept making tiny automatic corrections to hold position. But every other reading came back as contradiction. Engineer Sergeant Bayo Adisa was not running sensor sweeps. He was sitting on the floor of the engineering bay with his back against a coolant housing, reading through a research paper that Dr. Arvid Strand had transmitted along with the original data packet. It was dense, written for physicists, and Bayo had to stop every few paragraphs to look up terminology. But he kept going, because something in it bothered him in a productive way, the way a loose bolt bothers a good mechanic. Strand had found something in the data that nobody else had flagged. The dark matter ships were emitting a pulse, not electromagnetic, not gravitational, something that sat at a frequency range that most instruments were not built to look for, because the physics community had broadly agreed that nothing natural produced signals in that range. Strand had only caught it because his survey equipment was calibrated for dark matter density mapping, which required sensitivity in frequency bands that standard military or commercial sensors ignored entirely. The pulse was rhythmic, not random, not chaotic, rhythmic. Bayo put the paper down and thought about that for a while. Then he went to his toolbox. What he built over the next 11 hours was, by any professional standard, ugly. It used 3 components from a broken navigation relay, a signal amplifier that belonged to the ship's emergency beacon system, and a frequency filter he hand-tuned using a calibration tool, and what Strand's paper described as the target range. He wrapped it in thermal shielding tape, because 2 of the components ran hot, and he did not want to explain a small fire to Dara. He attached it to a helmet visor from the storage locker, because it needed to sit close to a human head to work, and he was not entirely sure why that mattered yet, only that Strand's paper mentioned, in a footnote, that initial dark matter frequency detection had shown unusual correlation with human neural proximity. He put the helmet on. For 3 seconds nothing happened. Then his vision did something it had never done before. Not blurring, not darkness, more like a layer being added, a geometry faint and blue-edged, overlaid on everything he could see. He could make out the interior walls of the ship. He could make out the shape of the engineering bay in a way that was not from his eyes. And at the edge of it, enormous and structured and threaded with something that looked, in this strange borrowed perception, like a circulatory system, was the dark matter ship. He pulled the helmet off. His head was pounding. He sat with the pain for a moment, then put the helmet back on. He called Dara on the internal channel and said, "Commander, I can see inside it." The rest of the crew gathered in the engineering bay within 4 minutes. Dara looked at the helmet, looked at Bayo, looked at the data he had captured during the 11 seconds he managed to keep the helmet on before the headache became too sharp to function through, and did not say anything dismissive. She studied the structural ghost image Bayo's recorder had captured from the helmet's output feed. It was not random inside the ship. There were chambers, channels, dense cores surrounded by elaborate branching structures, like a nervous system scaled to the size of a city. It was organized. It was purposeful. It was, in some deep structural way that none of them had the vocabulary for yet, alive. Nadia said quietly, "It's not a weapon." Nobody argued with her. Looking at that image, weapon was not the word that came to mind. You did not build something that intricate to destroy things. You built something that intricate because it had a function, a complex, interdependent, continuously operating function, and it had been operating for a very long time. Dara sent the data to Arvid Strand on Titan and to Admiral Carvalho on Earth. She included a brief note. It read, "The ships are not here to fight. We don't know what they are here for, but Sergeant Addisa has found a way to partially see inside them, and it requires a human neural field to work. Request immediate contact with Dr. Strand. This is a science problem, not a military one." Carvalho forwarded the message to the Concordat Council. Thesson's response arrived 4 hours later. It was 3 sentences. The third sentence said that humanity should remember its place as a junior member and not act unilaterally. The first sentence said, "Send us everything you have." Arvid Strand had not slept in 40 hours when he boarded the shuttle that took him from Titan to the INS Defiance. He had spent those 40 hours doing something that most of his colleagues considered professionally dangerous, guessing. Not random guessing, structured guessing. He had the pulse frequency. He had Bayo's helmet data. He had 6 pages of Nadia's passive sensor logs. And he had a very specific kind of physicist's instinct that told him the pulse was not passive background noise from the ships. It was directional. It was meant to reach something. He just did not know what. Navigator Sif arrived the same day, via a Concordat fast courier. Sif was Velhari, a species that had evolved on a tidally locked world with extreme gravitational variation, and over millions of years their biology had developed a sensitivity to gravitational gradients that no instrument could fully replicate. They perceived mass the way humans perceived temperature, not as data, but as sensation. Sif communicated in a low vibratory hum that the ship's translator rendered into flat, unhurried sentences. Sif's first words on boarding the Defiance were, "The ship outside is in discomfort." Everyone stopped what they were doing. Dara asked carefully, "Discomfort how?" Sif moved to the viewport and stood there for a long moment very still. There is a rhythm in its mass that is not smooth, like a heart that keeps almost skipping. It has been this way since I came within range. I thought it was instrument confusion at first. It is not. Arvid looked at Bayo. Bayo looked at his notes. He had logged something on day 2 of the observation that he had marked as probable sensor artifact, a slight irregularity in the mass shadow the ship cast on the Defiance's navigation system. He had not flagged it in his report because he thought it was equipment noise. It had been there every 8 minutes. The same interval as the pulse. Arvid sat down at a workstation and did not speak for 2 hours. When he finally turned around, he had a diagram on his screen that looked more like a musical score than a physics model. Regular intervals, nested patterns, a signal that was not asking to be detected by instruments, a signal that was asking to be felt. "It's not broadcasting into space," he said. "It's broadcasting into matter, specifically into organic matter with the right sensitivity range. It expected something to receive it, and the only biology that lands in that range, at least among every species we know, is us." The room was very quiet. Nadia said, "So it came here looking for us." "Not us specifically," Arvid said, "but something like us. The signal has been running for a long time, probably much longer than humanity has been in space. Whatever sent it was patient." Bayo built the transmitter in 3 days. It was larger than the helmet receiver and considerably more dangerous to operate, because sending a signal in the dark matter frequency range required an energy draw that would brown out the Defiance's secondary systems for several seconds per pulse. Dara authorized it. She made sure everyone was seated and holding something. The first transmission was simple, a prime number sequence. 7 pulses, 11 pulses, 13 pulses. Mathematics was mathematics. If something was listening, it would understand that this was intentional. The dark matter ship did not respond. Arvid said to try something else. He asked Sif what the discomfort rhythm felt like in more detail, and Sif described it in gravitational terms that took the translator a few seconds to render. A pattern that contracts and then releases, contracts and releases, with something heavy stuck at the center that will not move through. Arvid thought about that. Then he had Bayo transmit not a prime sequence but a pressure and release rhythm, the same pattern Sif had described. They were not saying hello. They were saying, "We can feel what you feel." The response came in 9 seconds. It did not come through the transmitter. It did not come through any sensor. It came directly through the hull of the ship as a vibration that Sif felt first and described immediately as, "It is answering. It is answering." Something opened. 3 crew members reported a sudden pressure behind their eyes. Arvid's nose bled. Bayo's vision went briefly dark matter blue the way it had with the helmet, without the helmet. On every screen aboard the Defiance, for exactly 4 seconds, an image appeared. Not transmitted data, not a structured signal, an image as if something had pressed a memory directly into the ship's systems. It showed a galaxy, not their galaxy, older, younger stars, different arm shapes, and moving through it, enormous and purposeful, were thousands of dark matter ships, but arranged not as a fleet, arranged as infrastructure, like a circulatory system, like a network of roads through space. Then the image was gone. Dara looked at the blank screens. She looked at Arvid, whose nose was still bleeding and who had not noticed. She looked at Sif, who was vibrating softly in what the translator identified as the Velhari expression for witnessing something very old. She picked up the channel to Admiral Carvalho. "Admiral," she said, "we made contact. They showed us something. I think they are trying to explain why they are here." Carvalho said, "What did they show you?" Dara looked at the blank screen where, 4 seconds ago, a dead galaxy had been. "What they used to be," she said. The Concordat Council chamber was built to hold 40 representatives and their full staff delegations, which meant on a normal session it held several hundred beings of wildly different sizes, atmospheric requirements, and communication styles, all trying to exist in the same pressurized space through the miracle of compartmentalized seating and very good translation software. On the day Dara and Arvid presented their findings, it held all of that, plus a silence so thick it had texture. Arvid had prepared for 2 hours. He was not a natural speaker. He talked too fast when nervous, which was always, and he had a habit of assuming the audience understood 3 steps of reasoning he had not explained yet. But on this day he slowed down. He showed the image the veil had sent, reconstructed frame by frame from the Defiance's screen logs. He played the pressure and release transmission and SIF's description of the response. He laid out, as plainly as he could, what they believed they were looking at. The dark matter ships were infrastructure, ancient, autonomous, and until recently dormant. A network built by a civilization that had ceased to exist in any conventional sense, running on a maintenance cycle that had been interrupted for 800,000 years, now reactivating because the electromagnetic output of modern galactic civilization had crossed a threshold that the network interpreted as a damage signal. The network was not attacking. The network was trying to repair itself. The repair process, if completed without intervention, would recalibrate the dark matter channels that modern hyperspace travel ran through, effectively collapsing every hyperspace lane in 3 galactic arms. Not forever, not intentionally, but the recalibration would take between 80 and 200 years, and no civilization could survive that kind of isolation. High Arbiter Thessen's first question was not about the science. It was, "How certain are you?" Arvid said, 60%. A Draukin delegate made a sound that the translator rendered as unacceptable. Arvid said, "It is the most certain anyone has been about anything involving these ships since they appeared. 60% is what we have." Thessen's second question was directed at Dara. "Your crew has been closest to these vessels for the longest period. What is your personal assessment, Commander? Not the data, your judgment." Dara thought about the image on the screen. The way the dark matter ships in that ancient galaxy had moved, not like weapons, not like predators, but like blood through veins. She thought about Sif standing at the viewport saying the ship outside was in discomfort. She thought about Bayo building a receiver out of broken relay parts and a helmet because he was bothered by a footnote. She said, "My personal assessment is that this thing is very old and very hurt, and it is trying to do its job. I think if we can talk to it properly, we can find a way through this that doesn't cost anyone their hyperspace network." Thessen looked at her for a long moment. Several of the other delegates spoke among themselves in low tones. Their translators did not bother broadcasting. Then a faction of 3 species, the Mern Collective, the Gethali Assembly, and a small militarized group called the Orvak, jointly broadcast on the open channel that humanity had clearly made contact with an entity of unknown intent, had acted without a formal mandate, and had potentially provoked a response that could still destroy galactic infrastructure. They moved formally that Earth be suspended from the Concordat pending investigation. Grevek did not speak during the vote. He simply stood, turned his back to the chamber, and walked out. The motion failed by 11 votes. What happened next was not planned and was not on the official record. Grevek's fleet, which had been sitting in a holding pattern beyond the outer belt for 6 days, quietly repositioned. By the end of the session, his 2,000 warships were between Earth and the Mern-Gethali-Orvak joint fleet. No weapons were raised. No communications were sent. It was the spatial equivalent of a very large being standing between a child and someone who wanted to cause trouble. Thessen granted humanity a provisional mandate to continue contact attempts. The wording of the mandate was careful and hedged, and included 17 clauses about human liability in the event of failure. Dara read it once, set it aside, and went back to the Defiance. On the way back, Nadia sat across from her in the shuttle and said, "If this goes wrong, they're going to blame Earth regardless of what any mandate says." "Yes," Dara said. "And you're still going. We're the only ones who can hear them. If we walk away because we're scared of being blamed, the network collapses anyway and everyone suffers." She looked out the viewport. Being scared of the consequences doesn't change what the right thing is. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Arvid's getting worse." Dara knew. The headaches Arvid had been managing since the first response transmission had become something more. He lost 40 minutes of memory on Tuesday. His hands shook on Thursday. He refused to stop working, and Dara had stopped ordering him to, because she understood that some people need to finish the thing they started more than they need to be safe, and Arvid was that kind of person. She would find a way to protect him. Later. Right now the network was still recalibrating. 3 more hyperspace nodes had gone dark in the last 48 hours. A colony ship called the Farida was stranded 6 months from the nearest lane with food for 4 months. There was no time to do this carefully. There was only time to do it. On the 29th day of contact, the Veil sent something new. It did not come as an image this time. It came as a sensation that every human on the Defiance felt at the same moment, a deep interior pull, like the feeling of a word on the tip of the tongue, except the word was vast and structural and had no equivalent in any human language. Sif described feeling a gravitational harmonic that was ordered in a way no natural source could produce. The Velhari called it in their own tongue the shape of an intention. Arvid said, "It's trying to make us understand something it cannot show us as a picture." They spent 4 days working through the exchange in careful pieces, using the pressure and release transmission method as a base and building outward from it, the way you build a shared vocabulary with someone who does not share your language. You point at a stone and say stone. You point at a fire and say fire. You describe pain with your face and see if they recognize pain in theirs. What the Veil was describing in the end was itself. It was not one being. It was not a species. It was a system. The founders, the civilization that built it, had not left it running with a crew or a consciousness of its own. They had encoded themselves into it. Not all of them, not completely, but enough. A collective impression, a distributed memory, a purpose. The Veil was what remains when a civilization chooses, at the moment of its transcendence, to leave something behind that will still care. And what it cared about was the network. The dark matter infrastructure was deteriorating, not from age, from interference. Thousands of years of hyperspace engines running through dark matter channels had introduced resonance distortions that were now cascading. The Veil had woken because the damage had crossed a critical threshold. It was doing what it was built to do, recalibrate. But it had not anticipated what it would find. The civilizations using the channels now were not descendants of the founders. They had evolved independently, without knowledge of the network they were running through. The Veil had no framework for inhabited systems as collateral damage. It was not designed to destroy. It was designed to maintain. Arvid understood this before he finished translating it, and he said so out loud in the middle of the exchange, loudly enough that the whole room stopped. It doesn't want to hurt anyone. It doesn't know how to stop hurting people. It needs an anchor point, a biological interface that can hold the recalibration frequency in a stable pattern long enough for the system to complete without collapsing the lanes. Sif said slowly, "What kind of anchor?" Arvid said, "A human one." The room was quiet. Nadia looked at her hands. Bayo looked at the ceiling. Arvid explained what the Veil had communicated. The interface was not fatal. It was permanent. Whoever agreed to it would carry a constant background connection to the Veil's frequency for the rest of their life. Their perception would change. They would be able to sense things others could not. They would not be harmed, but they would not be fully unchanged either. Arvid said he would do it. He said it immediately, before anyone could speak, in the tone of a person who has already decided and is simply announcing the outcome. Dara said no, and she said it just as immediately, because Arvid's hands had been shaking for 11 days, and he had lost a combined 3 hours of memory over the past week, and she was not going to let him volunteer for a permanent neurological change from a position of existing neurological damage. He argued. She let him argue because he deserved the right to argue. Then she said no again. Nadia stood up and said she would do it. Young, healthy, sharp, no family on earth waiting on her. Logical. Dara looked at her for a long time, then said no. Nadia said, "Then who? Because someone has to." Dara said, "Me." The argument that followed was brief. Not because it was not a good argument, but because Dara stopped engaging with it. She was the commanding officer. She was healthy. She had been the closest to this from the beginning, and she understood the risk better than anyone. She was also, and she did not say this out loud, the one most likely to be able to function in command with the change. She had steady hands and a calm mind, and she had spent her whole career making decisions she could not undo. This was one more. Carvalho's authorization came in 4 hours. It was short. It said, "If she is willing, then so is Earth." Grevak transmitted from his fleet a single line that the translator rendered as, "Humans are a strange people. This is not an insult." Thesson, when notified, requested that the anchoring process be broadcast on the Concordat channel, not out of respect, or so his message implied, but for the sake of scientific documentation. Dara agreed. She thought it was probably also out of respect, but she let Thesson have the framing he needed. She spent 1 hour alone in her quarters before the procedure. She did not write letters or record messages. She just sat and looked out the small viewport at the dark matter ship hanging in space outside. The enormous, old, tired thing that had woken up after 800,000 years and found a galaxy it did not recognize, full of beings it had never planned for, fumbling towards something it could not quite reach. She understood that feeling. She stood up, put on her uniform, and walked to the transmission chamber. The transmission chamber was a converted cargo hold. Bayo had spent 2 days lining it with frequency dampeners stripped from 3 different ship systems, not to block the signal, but to focus it, to make sure that what passed through the room went to Dara and not through the hull in a direction nobody had mapped yet. The chair in the center was bolted to the floor. The room smelled like solder and recycled air. Dara sat down. She did not close her eyes. She looked at the transmitter array Bayo had built, which was not beautiful, and thought that most of the things that mattered in the world were not beautiful. They were just built by people who stayed when they could have left. Bayo initiated the sequence. What happened next was not describable in the way that most things are describable, because it did not happen in any single sense. It did not feel like something entering from outside. It felt like something already inside her finding a frequency it had always almost been able to reach. The way a radio finds a station not by creating the signal, but by aligning with it. She felt the network. Not metaphorically, structurally. She felt every dark matter channel in the galactic arm the way you feel the bones in your own hand, not by thinking about them but by simply having them. The damage was visible to her in the same way that a bruise is visible, not data, not a report, just wrong color in a wrong place. And she could feel, running through all of it, the slow, vast, not quite consciousness of the veil, which noticed her immediately and went very still in the way that old things go still when they recognize something they have been waiting a long time for. It did not speak to her. It did not need to. It simply began to use the stable anchor she provided to complete, carefully and without collapsing anything, what it had spent 31 days trying to do alone. The recalibration took 6 hours. On the Concordat channel, Thesson's staff logged each hyperspace node as it came back online. 1, 7, 11. The Farida received a course correction and a projected rescue timeline. The 3-stranded colony ships sent confirmation signals within the hour. By the time the Defiance's night cycle came around, 41 of the 43 dark nodes had reactivated. Outside, the dark matter fleet began to change shape. Slowly across thousands of systems, the vast hull structures of the warships reconfigured. Not dissolving, not retreating, simply shifting from the dense, closed-off forms they had held for 800,000 years of dormancy into something more open. Something that looked, to Sif's gravitational senses, like a network of receivers, like ears, like a system settling into a new operational mode. Grevak broadcast on the open channel in the flat, unornamented tone that the Draukin used for things they considered historically significant. He said, "Humans, I owe you a drink." Nadia laughed out loud. Even Arvid smiled, sitting in the medical bay with an IV in his arm, and a color finally returning to his face now that the frequency stress had been resolved. The headaches had stopped the moment the anchoring completed. Whatever the resonance distortion had been doing to human neurology, the stabilized network no longer did it. In the Concordat chamber, Thesson addressed the full assembly. He spoke for 22 minutes. He acknowledged, without softening it, that the Concordat's dismissal of humanity's early warnings had nearly cost every member species their hyperspace network. He acknowledged that a junior member, with no mandate and no established protocol, had done what none of the senior members attempted: listened instead of shooting. He did not thank humanity. The Concordat's formal language had no construction for thanking a junior member without implying patronage. Instead, he said, on record, the Concordat's assumptions about the relationship between age and capability require revision. Everyone who heard it understood what it meant. The hostile faction stood down without comment 3 days later. Grevak's fleet withdrew the same afternoon. Nobody announced it. The ships were simply there one day and gone the next. Arvid began writing the first comprehensive guide to dark matter communication. Sif stayed aboard the Defiance to co-author it, and was formally granted guest researcher status by 3 different universities on Earth simultaneously. Bayo was assigned a full engineering team and a budget that made him genuinely uncomfortable, and which he spent with great precision. Nadia accepted a position as humanity's first Veil liaison, which was a title that had not existed before and for which no job description had been written, and she wrote the description herself. Dara went back to command. She was the same officer she had always been. She made the same decisions in the same measured way with the same steady hands. The crew noticed only small things: that she would sometimes pause at the viewport for a few seconds longer than usual, that she occasionally knew when a navigation correction was coming before the system flagged it, that she seemed, at certain moments, to be listening to something just below the range of hearing. 6 months after the anchoring, deep-range sensors detected a new dark matter formation at the galaxy's outer edge. Small, precise, geometrically intentional. The encoding was similar to the Founder's patterns but not identical. It was as if something had looked at the old language and written something new in a style that remembered it. The Veil sent Dara a single pulse, warm if a pulse could be warm, satisfied. She looked at the formation on the screen for a long moment. Then she opened a channel to Admiral Carvalho. "Admiral," she said, "you're going to want to see this." Outside, in the space between stars, the network hummed.